talk about the green initiatives in the budget. We're reaching out to Brett House, a professor of professional practice at Columbia Business School and a fellow with the Public Policy Forum, Munk School and Massey College. Brett, thank you for joining us again today.
Good to be on with you.
Now, of course, one cannot ignore, as I said, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act when we look at this budget, because really that's what many people were keeping an eye out for. From what you've seen so far, does this budget create a competitive plan to essentially attract investment north of the border?
Well, I think it does. Over the next 5 years, it provides $21 billion, I should say, in support through about $3 billion in investments in the Canadian electricity grid system, and then around another $17 billion of tax credits. They're meant to incentivize investments in clean manufacturing, hydrogen-related investments, and clean electricity generation. And I think that sets a tone that is a reasonable balance between the left that's calling for direct government investment or activities and running clean tech in the sector, and those who are concerned about gatekeepers. This is, in fact, getting the gatekeepers out of the way and letting the private companies that can do these things best do them.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned the clean electricity grid, and there was mention of that more than once in this budget. And I'm wondering, just how much larger does that grid have to be in order to attract investment?
Well, it's not just a question of investment, it's a question of greening Canadians' activities, because as Minister Boissonnault pointed out, if we are going to shift to greater electric vehicle use and greater use of electricity in heating our homes and powering our manufacturing, we are going to need a bigger and more robust grid that can respond smartly to changes in demand and that can integrate different types of electricity generation and storage for peak and lower demand periods. So that is a smart investment, and one that we can't look to the private sector to do in a comprehensive way across Canada right now. So it makes sense for public dollars to be going into that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Canada already gets, more than 80% of its electricity from green sources, or clean sources, rather. How much of an advantage is that, in particular when compared to the United States? Because, of course, the IRA still does figure large.
It's a huge advantage in terms of potentially positioning production in Canada for global markets, where Canada is fortunate, as Finance Minister Freeland mentioned, to have free trade agreements with countries that cover about 2/3 of the world's consumers. So to the extent that trade restrictions or tariffs are going to increasingly reflect or insist on clean or green manufacturing techniques, Canada is going to be well positioned to continue to position products coming from our manufacturing sector into markets around the world.
Mm-hmm. I'm also wondering what you might draw from what seems to be a difference in strategy, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, because when you look at the United States, it seems that the IRA rewards industrial output with its green initiatives, but Canada seems much more focused on encouraging private industry to help build capacity. Does that difference in strategy point to anything that we should be aware of?
Well, the U.S. strategy, which amounts to about $400 billion is matched in some ways by the scale of the Canadian initiatives outlined in this budget. We're about a tenth the size of the United States, and in terms of the initial investments in credits and direct spending, we're at about 5% of what the IRA brings forward. If you pull in other elements of the Canadian policy framework, such as our carbon tax pricing system, we at least meet what's in the IRA to encourage greener and cleaner production here. There is an emphasis here, though, on encouraging and creating the environment for clean manufacturing and clean investment. And I think from an economist perspective, that's a good thing, because it leaves the exact details on what's produced, how it's produced, and the most efficient way of doing so to private sector actors. And one of your earlier commentators noted that this wouldn't benefit startups. That is clearly incorrect when one reads the budget. These tax credits are refundable, which means that any spending from this point forward is going to be captured by these credits and eligible for them. So startups, new entrants, companies coming from abroad and investing in Canada would all be possible beneficiaries of these credits.
You know, I was speaking to an economist inside the budget lockup, Brett, and he was talking about how this budget environmentally has a lot of carrots, but not enough sticks, in that it may not be able to really direct the kind of investment Canada wants to be seeing here. And it was interesting to hear Joe Biden last week. It was during his joint news conference with the Prime Minister, because he said Canada would mine critical minerals, but the U.S. would be the ones producing products. How concerning should that kind of comment be for Canada if what we're trying to be is a country of more than just drawers of water, hewers of wood? Are there enough sticks to make sure we get the kind of outcome we want in this country?
Well, I don't know that sticks are the right approach. We could have provided more carrots here for refining and value-added activities on top of mining activities. There are substantial commitments here to encourage around three to 4 billion Canadian dollars of commitments to encourage mining of rare earth and other specialized minerals and metals that are necessary for the green transition. What we might have seen, and consistent with the fears piqued by Joe Biden's comments, is some further support for further refinement and integration of those minerals and metals into final products here. The gaffe by President Biden really did speak to decades, if not centuries, of Canadian insecurities that are rightly felt.
Okay. Brett, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.